Hi, everybody. It's Tim Hagen from Progress Coaching. And today we're going to talk about employees coaching each other and providing each other feedback. Now, before we get into the session, I want to make sure that everybody understands this will be 100% educational. Ask any questions you may have in the chat. I will have some moderators, hopefully, to respond to you and share some of your biggest concerns as it relates to employee development and things like that. But let me just share this with you. Employees coaching each other, it sounds crazy, right? Let me give you some context. I'm going to do a little bit of a parallel right now. When you think about people who are coaching each other, and I want to just share with you, I've been coaching boys volleyball on and off for about 30 years. And so when you think about, um, some of the things like, um, uh, boys coaching or playing sports, you wouldn't think, geez, boys players coaching each other, it sounds crazy. But then when you think about people who leave high school or they leave um, college, have they ever been taught the value of feedback? Have any of them been taught how to seek feedback, how to understand it, how to embrace it, how to receive it well? Have people been taught the value of having a mentor or coach for personal development? Now, we tend to talk about generations like, well, the younger generation wants feedback and coaching, but do they really know or have context to what that is? So let me go back to my volleyball analogy. I go back to boys volleyball for the past 30 years, and I do something very different. I will often have my captains read a book by Iceberg is Melting by John Cotter. It's about a penguin community with different characters and different objectives, and the iceberg is melting. And so these penguins will either go out and find a new iceberg for the community, or some will go out and just save themselves and stay at the new iceberg and never go back and tell anybody. And it kind of does a modeling of human behavior. So I make my captains read it and then share with me, what did you learn from it? How does this apply to the team? And then number two, I make every captain lead one timeout. I don't care if it's the freshman team, the JV team, or the varsity team. Everybody has to lead one timeout during a match as a captain. The coaches sit down. And I'm allowing young men to find their voice. It sounds corny, right? I've had more players go to college, come back and say, Coach, you're not going to believe this. I had to read that book we had to read in high school. They talk about leadership principles. I already know what they're talking about. And often we will hire some of our high school players, where I started a program recently, to coach club volleyball. And what's cool about it is we make them address the parents. We make them engage with the parents. If there's an issue with playing time, I'm right next to them, believe me. But at the same time, what we do is we really give them an apparatus to find their voice and to find their leadership. Now, when we get to the work world, let's talk about that just for a second. Think about, let's just say, a typical company of 250 employees. Typically, there's about a 10-to-1 ratio of employees to managers or leaders. So when you think about 250 employees, 25 will be in leadership positions. The other 225 are employees. So 80 to 90% of the bulk of any organization are going to be employees or individual contributors. Okay. They're the ones talking. They're the ones collaborating. They're the ones interacting. And here's something that I just want to share and give you a quick narration of a story I shared last week on LinkedIn Live. I had a supervisor who was talking about a manager, and she said, "Oh, you can just tell he doesn't care." And you could hear the, excuse the language, the piss and vinegar. And I said, "Okay." I said, well, "How do you know he doesn't care?" "It's just the way he carries himself." And so I want you to write this down. And and you're going to get angry with me once you start doing this, because then it becomes a trigger to look for it. Is people go into emotional interpretation. And I said, "Tell me without emotion what he did." And I calmed myself down. She said, "Well, he called me into the office and he was telling me that there were some things that were late in terms of some of the things we're doing on the shop floor. It's a manufacturing company." And I said, "Okay, was he wrong?" She said, "Well, I just didn't think I was the only one he should have brought in there." I said, "Whoa, whoa, 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 back up. Was he wrong about the things that were running late on the shop floor?" "Well, technically, no." Notice the emotional hedging? Technically, no. I'm like, wait a minute. Either yes or no. And I said, so yes or no? And she said, well, yes, but I shouldn't have been the only one. It wasn't really my fault. And I said, so let me ask you something. You said that he doesn't care. So what I'm doing that most people won't do, and let's be candid, most of us don't have the time to do it. I'm dissecting the conversation. And I said, you said he doesn't care. What do you mean he doesn't care? Well, I shouldn't have been the only one in there. I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's not an answer. That's an answer to a different question. That might be a tactical error. Maybe some other people should have been brought in, but you said he doesn't care. Well, I probably shouldn't have said that. I said, okay, now I'm going to ask you a question. And I know this young leader really well. And I know I had the latitude to do this with her. And I said, I'm going to ask you a question. I know the answer. You know the answer. I'm going to see if you're going to be honest. What I'm really doing is saying, be honest with me. I said, did you share those feelings that he doesn't care with anybody else in the company? And she looked away. She looked down. I said, you know the answer. I know the answer before you even are going to say anything. She said, yeah, but I said, no, 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 no. Yes or no. And I cut her off intentionally. Not great coaching, by the way. And she said, yes. I said, fantastic. She goes, what? What? And I go, you started a rumor. This is great. Now, once it gets to him, should he care more or less about you? And if he were to interpret that and he used the phrase, I felt stabbed in the back, would he be really off? She puts her head down. She goes, no, now the butts are gone. No. I said, okay, I want you to lift your head up. She said, what? And we're in face to face in a conference room. And I said, what you did is you emotionally interpreted something. It spun out of control. And it spun out of control between your ears. And then you had the audacity to tell other people that is not what a leader does. That is what a water cooler person does. That's what a bleacher person does. And so we have this philosophy in our teachings. There are three types of employees. We have players, people on the field, they're running the plays. And I love to use volleyball as an analogy. You know, in volleyball, we come together after every single play. We high five, we smile, whether we win the point or not. How often do we celebrate people's errors or mistakes or learning experiences in the workplace? Probably rarely. Number two, then there are bleacher people. See, the bleacher people sit up in the stands and they complain and complain and complain and complain about the players in the field. Now you got in between the bleacher people and the players, you've got something called the fencers, the people straddling the fence. See, what they do is they look over their shoulder and go, man, the bleacher people just sit there and all they do is talk about people. That actually looks pretty easy. And oh, by the way, the bleacher people, they are phenomenal recruiters of fencers. See, a lot of times when people are running the plays, the players in the field, they have their head down, they're running their routes, they're running their plays. They don't feel the need to go recruit people. And that's where, if we can teach people to coach, if we can teach people to seek feedback and provide feedback, good things will happen. So, how do we go about doing this? Number one, I'm going to give you a smattering of techniques. Some of them you're going to think I'm crazy. And I want you to just think about using them and certainly making them your own. Number one, in person 360s with silent responses. In person 360s with silent responses. Now, how do you do this? You frame out the feedback. So if I'm giving feedback to Joe, I would say, Joe, here's where I think you have an awesome opportunity to improve. That's the phrase. Here's where you have an awesome opportunity to improve. And I fill in the blank. Joe's only response in a session can be, thanks, Tim. That's it. Nothing more. Then the next day, Joe has to come back and share what he learned from the feedback and what he's going to do to put into positive action based on the feedback. So what we're nurturing is the mindset of embracing feedback, reflecting upon the feedback, and then positively putting it into action. And I'll tell you, I've done this before, and you get people like this. I really want to say something right now. And I said, I know you do. It's tough, isn't it? Well, I don't agree with the feedback. And I said, Is the feedback wrong? Well, I don't think it's 100% right. And people really start to emotionally interpret. We all do. I do. Everybody does. And so we have an emotional trigger on our body. It's a button. See, often feedback is dismissed or received based upon agreement or disagreement. And so I always try to teach leaders, remember, there's a value of teaching feedback or delivering feedback in the format of perception versus intent. So, John, I would love an opportunity to share with you some perception so you're not blindsided. See, if we teach that phrase, Jill, I'd love to provide you some feedback where I think you have an opportunity to really control perception because the last thing I want you to do is be caught off guard. See, if we teach people, and that's the second technique, is to deliver feedback with protection. See, when we deliver feedback with protection, guess what happens? We're still delivering the feedback, but we're protecting our teammates. Number three, permission plus the sword. Teach your people how to ask for permission. Jill, would you mind if I shared with you some perspectives and I think some really cool opportunities as it relates to perception from a teamwork standpoint? Would that be okay? And if she says, well, sure, go ahead. Now she's invited the feedback. Doesn't mean she's going to love it, but she's invited it. Now it can't be, I felt attacked. The second part of that could be also the sword. Jill, would you mind if I provided you some feedback where I think we have opportunities to really tighten up the teamwork? And the last thing I want to do is assume where you're coming from because I think that would be unfair to you. And I'd love to hear from you. That's called the sword. I'm throwing myself on the sword. I'm owning this issue right now. So I don't make assumptions of where you're coming from because I think that could be very unfair to you. It's a great way, it's a great catalyst to starting a conversation that makes it safe. Now, let's get to the last part. That's feedback. Coaching. When you get people who are coaching, and a lot of times people immediately go into this stratosphere of, yeah, but I don't have the title of manager. Who am I to coach somebody? It's not really my assigned person and it's not really my assigned responsibility. They come up with every reason why not to do it. So, what I always encourage people to do is start with low hanging fruit coaching. Number one, 30-second coaching. Assign a positive coach for the week and just say this week, John, you have to find two people that have done some things that were, outstanding. And you just have to simply say, you know what, Jill, that marketing report or that presentation you gave last week, I just wanted to reach out to you, was fantastic. We don't do that enough, especially in the virtual world. Number two, so when you have a positive coach, also have a public praise coach where somebody in a staff meeting, yes, virtually in a Zoom meeting, in WebEx, when you go around the room and you can even plant these people, you want to make sure it's authentic and honest. And all of a sudden, Steve says, yeah, you know what, John, I'd like to share something. I was working with Susie last week and my kids were sick. And to be honest with you, she did the bulk of the project. She was fantastic. She really made my week a lot more manageable. And I just want to say thank you. When you get people talking about each other positively, it's also tough to be in the bleachers talking negatively. And we as coaches have to facilitate that coaching between each other. Number three, train your employees on coaching, how to ask questions. So, number three, we have 30-second coaching. Number one, we have, then we have public coaching, public praise. And then we have really using questions. And I think questions are one of the most powerful things we can teach our people. See, when we have emotional triggers, and we immediately go into the stratosphere of emotional interpretation, that's where, when you think about a conversation, think of it this way. Think about it on a highway. Okay, we're traveling a highway, and the minute somebody has a trigger, they get off on an exit. We don't even get to the end of the highway or the end of the conversation. Think about it this way. Think about holidays with family when people have had a few drinks and some old issue comes up. That really calms the dinner, doesn't it? So what happens with questions is it helps build clarification. So one of the things that you could do is to teach them what questions, as corny as that sounds, simple as it sounds. John, what was your objective in doing the marketing report that way, because the last thing I want to do is make assumptions. I think that would be unfair to you. So what did I do? I grabbed a what question plus the sword. So I don't make assumptions. The reason you start with what versus a question like why, the people you're talking to will be less inclined, or teammates will be less inclined to feel defensive, such as, John, why did you do the marketing report that way? Sounds different than, John, what was your objective? So the other thing is active listening. I want to share with you a great story, and it's actually the same manufacturing company I was just alluding to. I got a call from a director who's ahead of two managers, two departments, not working well together. In a pandemic, they made products that actually do some good things for the pandemic. So business was actually good, and there was just fighting. And he calls me up and he said, "Would you attend the meeting?" He said, "What?" I said, "Just attend the second meeting. I just want you to observe." And I thought, okay. And I love to observe. I love to sit in public places and observe people, how they interact, and how leaders coach or how they talk to each other. It's kind of what we're immersed in, right? And so one of the amazing things is I was watching them, and they sat in the room and they came down and they all sat in opposite ends of the table from each other. I mean, it was already adversarial before a word was spoken. And here was the amazing thing. I started to pull out a piece of paper and I started to make slash marks, and I kept making slash marks. And the leader was like, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm counting nonverbal sets of discord." He said, "Oh," he goes, "You're counting what?" I said, "Watch." And we're whispering in the back of the room. I said, "Watch. The minute somebody says you get this," yeah, and they break eye contact, which means I'm done listening to you. They roll their eyes. I've now said, I disagree with you. I fold my arms. I'm digging in for a battle. So we got done with the meeting. It was about 29 minutes. It was about a half an hour set meeting. They came to no resolution with the differences. And I didn't even understand the issue, to be honest with you. And I said, "Look, I can't come to the third meeting at your scheduled date. Here's what I'd like you to try. Create a rule of engagement. And the rule of engagement is you are not allowed to respond to somebody until you demonstrate understanding of what the person before you said." He said, "Oh," he said, "won't that slow the meeting down?" I said, "Oh, yeah, big time it'll slow the meeting down. And the value to you is it will slow the meeting down." He goes, "Oh," he goes, "Okay." And I said, "Now you want to do it and then sit back and see if they can execute." So what happened was he called me up and he said, "You're not going to believe this. We came to a resolution at 21 minutes." Said, "What happened?" He said, "I started to do your stupid slash marks." He said, "But this time I was counting the number of times that either people misspoke or misunderstood. So when somebody said, 'Okay, John, here's what I've heard you say,' the person across the table would say, 'No, no, 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 that's not what I meant. I'm sorry. Let me explain it.' Because sometimes I'm as guilty of this as anyone. I don't explain things concisely as much as I should, and it's something I'm working on. Number two, if somebody hears what I say that I don't explain really concisely and they emotionally interpret it and they tell six other people, that's called our workplace culture. That's why when I see all these things about measure your workplace culture and we have to do this and we have to do that, I mean, we have to teach people conversational skills. That's why teaching employees how to provide feedback, how to accept feedback, how to reflect upon feedback, how to coach one another, how to praise one another, how to talk positively about one another, how to use questions, how to use the sword, how to truly use and implement active listening. See, we're all creatures of habit. Let me give you a last bit of context to creatures of habit. Salespeople have been taught for decades who should do the bulk of the talking? The customer. Typically, the percentage is 80-20, right? Why is it that when I ask people, what's the one thing you hate about salespeople? They do what too much? Ah, yeah, they talk too much. Because we can't help ourselves. And I'm a male salesperson. So what happens is that we become creatures of habit. What you have to do with employees is break up their habits. So let me give you the last context. When you're providing feedback and teaching your people feedback, use something that we call a self actualized question. So you can even supervise this or even have a team of leaders do this. So you could do it even in your team with two people at a time. John, I want you to give one set of feedback to Susie. And Susie, I'd love to have you do something a little bit weird. And so we call this triangle coaching. And it's a really, really, really cool thing that you can do in small doses. It's called triangle coaching. You're the facilitator. So, John, tell Susie two opportunities where she can raise her game as a teammate. Let's pretend that they're struggling with teamwork. And Susie, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to write those down. Okay. All right. And then, Susie, once you're done writing it down, I want you to give two doses of feedback where John has an opportunity to raise his game. And I'd like you to phrase it, John, I think we have an opportunity to raise your game as a teammate is here, here, and here. The rule is you have to use it in business professional terms. This is not personal gotcha. You two okay with this? Great. Once you get done with that first set, then what you do is you ask people to look down at the feedback that they got from their teammates and say, now underneath the two things that you wrote down that you got from your teammate, I want you to write down two actions you're going to take to positively alter that perception. So you've gone from feedback reception without rebuttal, without yeah, but, to truly owning the feedback. I love doing this because you know what? It's funny. People they start breathing heavy. They get really they get really hyped up in it, and all of a sudden, when they start to write down the positive actions, you notice blood pressure going down because they've gotten past the embracement, the delivery, the impact, the blow of feedback from a teammate. And all of a sudden, when they answer the question, a self-actualized question, what are you going to do to successfully? What are two things you could do successfully to battle or to offset that perception based on the feedback you got from your teammate? Now, that's triangle coaching. Okay. Here's the last question. This is something that you can use, um, and this is called a self awareness question. Now, I love self awareness because we all lack it. And that's at the foundation. Remember the employee I was talking about where the manager doesn't care? She lost total self awareness of her emotional control. So when you do this triangle coaching and they get down, they write things down, you look at Jill and say, Jill, what did you learn about yourself and the way you receive feedback today where you have an opportunity to continue to improve? What did you learn about yourself where you have an opportunity to positively improve? John, same question. What did you learn about yourself? You know what they always say? Yeah, I got to listen. Yeah, I got to be less emotional. Yeah, I got to not interrupt. Yeah, I've got to listen. But they all know the answer, but we have to facilitate the experience. So when you get employees, the bulk of our population inside our organizations, coaching each other, providing feedback in a safe and thoughtful way. Now, we have a program at our company. This is not a sales pitch called the Everyday Coach. And this is exactly what we do. And it's such a fun thing to deliver because what you're also doing is building emerging leaders, succession planning. You're building strength in conversation by strengthening the foundation, the bulk of the organization. The people above have less problems to deal with. So, put some questions in the chat. We will monitor the chat as best we can. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We would love to hear from you, but we're going to do this probably every Monday at 3:30. I hope this is worth your time. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it.